Afterwards, I went to the people who were struggling against evil and made an effort to win their confidence. Eventually, choosing an appropriate moment, I asked them, "Who do you serve?" They were embarrassed. "You see, you yourselves do not know," the devil said. "You say that you are fighting evil, but can you possibly believe that evil would exist on earth unless God allowed it? As evil does exist on earth, obviously it must be part of the plan of the higher being. Can you really believe that the higher being could not cope with evil if he had to? You do not seem to understand that evil is a means of perfecting mankind. Suffering is very often the only way that one can come to understand higher spiritual truths. And you want to struggle against it. Can't you understand that you are fighting against the plan of the higher being, against the evolution of mankind? Besides, all evil is relative. Something that is evil at one level of evolution can be good at an earlier stage because it provides the essential stimulus for development. But you want to judge everything by your own standards. You have reached a comparatively high level, and so you see what you fight against as evil. Just think of the others, those who are at an earlier stage of development. Do not bar them from the path towards progress and evolution. If only you could have seen the effect it had on them. Deep in thought, they dispersed. And soon every one of them had written a book in which each, in his own way, proved the inevitability and necessity of evil. These books were a great success. Gradually, the struggle against evil turned into the justification of evil. Even the authors did not notice what was happening. It was exceptionally easy to do, because the justification of evil was by then far from being a crime. It was, on the contrary, considered to be honorable and deserving of every encouragement. Eventually it reached a point where there was literally no evil which those who had been fighting evil were not prepared to justify. These two cases were among the more difficult ones. I found it much easier to cope with the others. Sometimes when I noticed the appearance of unhealthy fantasies, I told people that they were a secret which had to be kept from the uninitiated. This has a wonderful effect on people. First, they begin to pride themselves on being initiated. And secondly, they begin to discover new secrets, just the ones I need. Love of neighbors and secrets, these are my favorite weapons. Scattering the seeds of falsehood in these areas yields particularly rich harvest. This is especially useful in the battle against mysticism. Mysticism is the most dangerous thing for the descendants of Adam to get hold of. It is on the basis of a shared mysticism that they can recognize one another. There is an old prophecy that Adam's descendants will unite on a mystical quest, conquer the descendants of the animals, and rule the world. Could that ever happen, I asked. I should think not, said the devil contemptuously. In any case, we are always on the alert to prevent such things from happening. And there is also the fact that Adam's descendants all have a deeply held belief, however foolish, that all their everyday life is sleep, and they long to wake up and see something quite different. And are you afraid they will wake up? I said. Of course the possibility exists, said the devil, which is where I began. I've already told you how much I work and self-sacrifice is demanded of us just to keep you on earth. I cannot see any self-sacrifice, I said. No, you can't see it. Of course you can't see it because I have not shown you anything yet. Those examples I cited refer to people susceptible to lies. But we do have some very difficult cases indeed. In fact, to tell you the truth, the most reliable solution is the very one we use for Adam. Only now this method demands much more work and self-sacrifice. It was easy enough for the serpent to bring Eve the fruit. Now we need quite different guises. Many of us have to give up our lives in order to keep some obstinate person on earth. And that is not all. Our main danger is that from time to time, the descendants of Adam realize how numerous they are and they begin to find ways of drawing closer to each other. That is the danger. As long as they live separately, we can cope with them in the same way as we did with Adam. But when they join together, when hotbeds of infection spring up all over the place, and when those breeding grounds begin to spread and connect up, it is then that we feel the danger, and we have to resort to other, more powerful means. I would like to show you a remarkable instance of self-sacrifice on our part. You people are not capable of anything like it. The devil stretched out his hand. The rock wall to the right of me parted, and became bathed in evening sunlight. I saw a street in Colombo, near Victoria Park. On all sides were gardens with low trellises or stone walls. It was only here and there that the distant roofs and the verandas of houses could be seen. Flowering trees and the fire tree with bright red, flat-capped flowers, trees of many colors, light blue, yellow or mauve, the pink earth, peculiar to Ceylon. Crossroads marked by huge banyan trees, mammoth in comparison with the other trees, and the thick yellow bamboos with dark leaves. This part of Colombo is truly a garden city. In the middle of the street, a black rickshaw bowled along. In the carriage sat a man in a white suit and a wide-brimmed sun helmet of the kind usually worn in Ceylon. I recognized him, an acquaintance of mine, a young Englishman called Leslie White. I had met him a few months before in the south of Ceylon, at a feast in a Buddhist monastery. Afterwards, we sat together for a long time in the cell of a learned monk discussing Buddhism. Leslie White was, in many respects, unlike the usual middle-class colonial Englishman. He was completely lacking in the absurd snobbery of the civil service. He pursued his many interests with zeal and sincerity. He never tried to affect that tone of mocking indifference to everything in the world but sport. Sport is the one thing supposed to be taken seriously. And he did not hide his liking for the natives. This demanded great independence in a country where a minor bank clerk is ashamed to be seen talking to a Brahmin in public. He had lived in Ceylon for 2 years and held a post under the governor. He studied the local languages, and risking his personal reputation as well as his position in the service, he had many friends among the Sinhalese and Tamils. He treated local English society very coolly and was seldom to be seen in it. He had read a great deal, studied Indian religions and Indian art. He understood many things about the East, of which we have much to learn, and gave thought to the significance Eastern ideas could have for the West. We often met and discussed such matters. I enjoyed his company for although so knowledgeable, he was not in the least pedantic. He liked horses and the sea, and owned a catamaran, a narrow boat resembling a spider, which he took out to sea with the native fishermen, occasionally disappearing for several days at a time. For him, work was no more than an inevitable evil. He had already been marked down as a person who would not go far in the service, and would have been better placed in an academic post. Altogether, he contrasted sharply with the heroes of Kipling, and seemed to me to represent a new type of Englishman in India, born after Kipling and still very rare. The rickshaw stopped by a garden trellis beyond which a two-story bungalow was just visible. Now I knew whom Leslie was visiting. An Indian Tamil lived there. He was wealthy and well known in Ceylon, and I had met him several months before, shortly before I left. I remembered I had written to Leslie about him. This Indian was already an old man and cultivated in the European sense. He told me many very interesting things about yogis and yoga. Talking to him, I always felt that he knew much more than he was saying. I met him under rather peculiar circumstances, and at our first meeting, I completely failed to understand him. But soon I was convinced he was the only person who could help me discover the real, miraculous India. I greatly wanted Leslie to meet him and talk to him. They had met previously, but only on official occasions. Now I gathered that Leslie had followed my advice and come to see him at home. The rickshaw boy charted away from the garden gates, and Leslie walked between the flower beds up to the house with the big veranda. He was met first by two white-turbaned servants and then ushered in by his host, who was dressed in a European tassore frock coat. After a few minutes, they sat down and began to talk. Yoga and everything that is connected with it has interested me for a long time, said Leslie. I have read everything I could get hold of on the subject. It seems to me that yoga can answer many of our questions. I would dearly like to see the practical results of yoga, so as to convince myself that it is more than just theories. I understand the basic idea. To practice yoga, each individual must live his whole life according to what he has decided to do with it. The magician, the merchant, the soldier, each must live, eat, and breathe differently. This will cause his work to be of the highest standard, and as such will be for him a means of spiritual purification. It strikes a European as preposterous that if I want to study philosophy, I must eat in a special way. But I understand this. By the way I see it, the supreme aim of yoga is to eradicate discord and close the abyss between the ideological and the practical side of life, by way of making everything material subordinate to ideas. I understand all this in theory. However, I want to know whether in fact yoga does give the miraculous results claimed for it. You understand the basic essence of yoga completely, the Indian replied. Yoga is precisely the harnessing of life in the yoke of ideas. You know that the word yoga has the same root as your English word yoke. Yes, Leslie replied, I know that, and I find it interesting and of paramount importance that the East understands the need to unite all the trivial things of life with the highest ideological aspirations in such a way that nothing would remain isolated or superfluous. I understand that to a yogi, every breath and every step is a prayer, which draws him ever nearer to the ideal. And here we find the main difference between the East and the West. We build our ideals separately from life, and live separately from the ideal. We accept petty, insignificant, vulgar, and often disgusting and brutal reality, but we console ourselves with the beauty of our ideals. You want every minute of your life to be imbued with the ideal and to serve it. I understand all this, but tell me, are there ever any real results achieved by yoga? Or does it all come down to travelers' tales of India? Do you understand? I want to know whether all these miraculous happenings I've read about in books on yoga ever really took place. Clairvoyance, second sight, mind reading, thought transference, knowledge of the future, and the like. I often wake up at night. I suddenly felt that Leslie was speaking from the depth of his soul. And think, can it really be true that somewhere there are people who have achieved something miraculous? I know I would drop everything to follow such a person, but I must be sure that he has succeeded. You must understand me. I cannot believe in words any longer. Too often have we been deceived by words, and I cannot deceive myself anymore, nor do I want to. Tell me then, are there people who have attained something, and what is it they have attained? And could I attain the same, and how? Leslie fell silent, and I saw that the old Indian looked at him with a quiet and affectionate smile, as if he were a child. Yes, there are such people, he said slowly, and you can see them. If you come to me and tell me that this is what you want, you will see them. Only you must realize this cannot happen all at once in one day. If you really want to learn, I will tell you, friend, come and live with me. Try to understand our thoughts. Try to learn to think in a new way. To learn from a teacher, it is necessary to understand him. That demands long preparation. Meanwhile, I will inquire about the whereabouts of a teacher of my acquaintance. We do not use the post or the telegraph. In 2 weeks' time, a man is going to travel to India, to Puri. There in the temple, he will ask where the teacher can be found. And perhaps he will find someone who knows, and through whom he can let the teacher know that we would like to see him. Then, in the same way, through somebody else, the teacher will let us know when he will be coming here, or where we should go to meet him. Sometimes he lives in the country near a small village in the jungle, or in the mountains. Sometimes you can find him in one of the big temples in Madras or Tandoor, or somewhere else. But it is necessary to wait patiently. The pupil must stand at the door and wait till the teacher calls him. It could be tomorrow, it could be in a month's time, or it could be in a year. I saw that Leslie was listening intently, but also that he was not at all happy with what the Indian was saying. And the teacher you are speaking of, has he attained those things which I have read about in books? The Indian again smiled. What is it, according to you, he should attain? You yourself admit and agree that the aim of yoga is the subjection of life to an ideal. Isn't that an attainment in itself? if each minute of a person's life is subject to the search for higher meaning? Is it not an attainment that the person is free of those inner contradictions of which your whole life is composed? Is it not attainment to have that inner peace, silence, and calm which reigns in the soul of a teacher? And since you speak of supernatural psychic forces, a teacher does possess them, although he does not attach any significance to them. It may be that he will see fit to show you his powers, but you cannot demand that he should. You cannot make it a condition. The teacher himself decides what you need, and you must trust him. I could see that there was a great conflict in Leslie's soul. He felt drawn toward his companion, and he liked him. He wanted to believe him, but at the same time his European mind could not agree with what the Indian was saying and how he was saying it. You say that you are prepared to leave everything, continued the old man, but that is not necessary at all. On the contrary, it is very often more important to continue with one's life as before, and to subject this life to your higher endeavor. Look at me. You know me. I occupy myself with politics and business and live as a family man. I have not left anything. To retreat into a wilderness is often the easiest way, but you must not always do what is easiest. Sometimes it is necessary to take the more difficult path. Later on, the teacher will tell you what you need to do. I can tell you only one thing. Learn to think in a new way. For as long as you are ignorant of the right way of thinking, it will always seem to you that what I am saying leaves out something important. I would just like to see the actuality, said Leslie. When I have seen that, I will be easy in my mind in regard to the rest, and I will do everything I am told. You do see my point. My intellectual conscience does not allow me to accept the existence of objective facts on faith. To acknowledge them as facts, I must see them. The old Indian smiled again. If you will follow the way of yoga, he said, a whole series of changes will begin to take place in your soul. First of all, you will start to discover a succession of new and different values. Along with the appearance of these new values, the old ones will begin to pale and disappear. And then, perhaps that which at present you hold to be most important will seem quite unimportant. This cannot be explained in words, it can only be felt. Only one who has lived through such inner upheavals will understand me. In fact, everyone has had some experience of this in the passage from childhood to adulthood. To children, toys, games, school activity, the opinion of teachers all seem incredibly important. Then, think how insignificant all that seems to a youth who loses his heart to a woman. At such moments, he shuns his comrades, for their conversations sound ridiculous to him. In the same way, in the soul of a yogi, a new love blossoms, and all the values of ordinary life he sees as children's toys. So it will be with the facts you seek, for they may not seem so important to you eventually. That may be, said Leslie, but why then do they constantly speak about these facts? Why refer to them and build everything on them? One cannot refer to facts which have not been proved. If you speak like that, you do not understand, said the Indian. He who understands speaks of other matters, the inner, not the outer life. At the beginning, you were on the right track. It is necessary to eradicate the conflict between the life of ideas and the life of every day. In order to achieve this, it is necessary that you should know yourself. Each moment, know what you are doing and why. Only then will you be the master of things rather than their slave. Usually, you carry out your wishes before you have given any thought as to whether or not they are necessary for your higher aims. Try to live in such a way that you keep a watch on your actions and do nothing that does not serve the higher purpose. Or, to put it in another way, learn to do everything in such a way that whatever you do serves a higher purpose. It is possible to do that. If something is particularly difficult, look upon it as an exercise. Remember, everything which you do that is difficult, you do in order to subject yourself to the Spirit. Then everything will become easier and everything will have meaning. But whatever you are doing, it is vital that you ask yourself before each thought, before each word, before each action, why am I doing this? Is it necessary? Then, imperceptibly, a number of your actions and deeds will cease to be unnecessary, and they will start to serve the higher aims. The inner conflict in your life will begin to disappear and be replaced by harmony. Then, learn to give yourself rest. This possibly is the most important. Learn not to think. Learn to control your thoughts. Ask yourself frequently whether it is necessary to think about what you are thinking. Or might it be better to think about something else? Or better still, not to think at all. This is the most difficult of all, but it is essential. Learn to think and not to think at will. Know how to stop thoughts. Be able to create inner silence within yourself. The moment will come when you will hear the voice of silence. This is the first and most important yoga. When this comes, when you begin to hear the voice of silence and stillness, then those new forces and abilities you talk of can begin to appear in you. At first they will be vague and imprecise, but later they will become as obedient to your will as sight, hearing, and touch. But everything should be accepted calmly, without hurry, without forced attention to inner progress. Attention can prevent the growth of new capacities. Then it is necessary to learn to see every object as a whole. Do you understand what this means? Normally, you see only the parts of a thing, either only the beginning without any continuation, and the end, or the middle, or the end. Always set yourself to see everything as a whole. To reach this viewpoint, you start to think of everything in reverse. Do not take the beginning without the end. Then you will begin to see much more in things than you see at present. What is clairvoyance? We are now sitting on the veranda and we see part of the garden. If you wish to see the whole garden, you must go up to the next floor. If you go higher still, you will see the whole town. A clairvoyant is a person who can see more than others. To see more, you must climb higher. That is the whole secret. But what does it mean, climbing higher, said Leslie. I see that at some times it may be possible, at other times impossible. But in what sense is climbing used? In the sense of abstract meditation on objects or on other kinds of things? And what will the result be? Will it lead one to any kind of new powers? And once again the same question. Is there someone who possesses these powers? I cannot believe that I would be the first. You will not be the first, said the Indian. However, in order eventually to achieve this, you must first of all realize how far from it you are at this moment. You are like a child who is crying because his father does not permit him to mount his spirited warhorse, does not put his own gun into his hand, nor his heavy sharp saber. A child must first grow up, and then he will receive everything. And in any case, at present he could not have made use of anything. He could lift neither gun nor sword, and the horse would throw him immediately. First become master of what you have, and afterwards strive for greater things. Analyze your day. Is much of your time given up to a search for higher things? Try to ask yourself every hour what you have done during that hour. Yogis ask themselves every minute. Continual practice is necessary to gain self-control. At present, the whole of your life consists of compromise in one way or another. How do you expect to develop your power of endurance? You probably go in for sports? Leslie nodded his head. What is your favorite sport? Football, cricket? Polo, said Leslie. Very well then, polo. Surely you understand the necessity of training for polo. It is equally necessary to train both yourself and your pony. Both of you need daily exercise. Imagine that for 3 months you did not mount a pony and you have spent your nights in a club playing cards. Your pony is left standing in the stables for 3 months, and the lazy groom does not even bother to exercise him every day. And imagine taking part in a big match. How will it turn out? Have you any chance of winning? You know very well there's not the slightest hope. You will have neither the strength, nor the dexterity, nor the endurance. Your pony will not obey you. He will tire at the very beginning of the game, and he will tire even earlier. Since you know from past experience that this is true of polo, why would you not admit the same thing about your soul? It has to become accustomed gradually to the new order of ideas, to the new plan of life. And when you begin to achieve something, then, together with the blossoming of new powers in your soul, you'll begin to notice that you are no longer alone on the path. Though all around the night will be dark, everywhere on the path you will begin to see lights, and you will understand that these are travelers who are going in the same direction with you, to the same temple, to the same feast. Leslie sat and listened, and I could see that in spite of the abundance of Eastern metaphors, usually unpalatable to a European, the main content of what the Indian was saying corresponded very much to what he had himself been thinking. Nearly all of what he heard, Leslie had read or had heard previously. Nevertheless, his companion impressed him as a person who knew. With the cool, good sense of an Englishman, Leslie got the gist of what the old Indian was saying, and I saw that in Leslie's heart, along with sympathy and spontaneous gratitude to the old man, a firm and definite decision was developing. What must I do to follow the way? He said. So far I find nothing to daunt me. Begin to observe yourself, said the Indian. Try to limit yourself, even if it is only in a matter of cutting out what you do not need anyway, but which takes most of your time and energy. Try to understand that you are a long way from the beginning of the way, and soon, in the distance, you will see the way. The pictures were changing before my eyes. Leslie was again traveling in a rickshaw, and I saw that he was repeating the words of the Indian to himself and trying to sort them out. He had raised objections during his talk with the old man, but in reality everything he heard had made a much bigger impression on him than he had shown. This interested me very much. Leslie was a persistent person. I felt that if he took something on, he would not compromise. It occurred to me that if anything could be achieved by way of yoga, then he would achieve it. He had a great sense of adventure and the courage of a pioneer, always blazing new trails. He had a spark which did not allow him to be content with a peaceful life in a civilized place. He was the kind of man who discovers new countries. The rickshaw was rolling through dark gardens. Leslie was sitting in the carriage, holding his hat on his knee. Strange to say, he was not alone. Along the left side of the rickshaw, some small creature was running. Looking intently, I saw this was a little devil. He was small, with a pot belly on disproportionately thin legs, and his fairly good-natured features were of a Chinese cast. The only oddity in his face was the narrow, unsympathetic lips, which he constantly licked with his long, thin tongue. He had small horns on the forehead, and in his yellow eyes, small and shrewd cunning shone, and some secret thoughts. He ran very quickly with tiny mincing steps, but without any effort, as if it did not matter to him. With a naughty smile, he grabbed sometimes at the thin shaft of the carriage, apparently attempting to hamper the black rickshaw runner. At least twice he entangled himself in his legs so that the rickshaw boy stumbled and nearly fell. And when Leslie arrived at the station, I noticed that the runner was soaked in sweat and breathing hard, as if he had been running in the heat. You see, the devil told me, this one has been appointed to look after him in order to prevent him from committing too many follies. Where did he come from, I asked, and what can he prevent? How he will prevent it is his business, said the devil. What he must prevent, you can guess for yourself. We consider yoga to be playing with fire. He who is carried away by it loses connection with earth. The danger is much greater than you think. These silly ideas spread, and sometimes we have to resort to extreme measures. Take this Leslie White. You were right. If he takes up something, he will not let go. This is where the danger lies. That is why this little devil is attached to him. This is a very clever and good little devil. He genuinely and sincerely loves people, even if I do not quite understand him. But at the same time, I agree that in this particular case, he will achieve more than, say, I would. Sometimes one can only influence by kindness, but see what is happening now. The train arrived. Leslie entered the first-class compartment, and the train rolled further along the seashore. I knew this place well. Leslie was traveling out of town to the hotel where he was staying. This hotel stands on the seashore on a rocky promontory surrounded on three sides by water. Along both sides of the hotel, to the north towards Colombo, and to the south stretched sandy beaches dotted with coconut palms and small fishing villages. Leslie arrived at the hotel and went directly to his room, facing the sea, to dress for dinner. The black servant had already put out his soft shirt, collar, and dinner jacket. But when Leslie looked at his clothes, he anticipated the tedium of the same people, the same conversation. Why must I have dinner, he asked himself. Am I hungry? Or have I only so little strength? It made him laugh. The old man was right, he continued to think. What an incredible amount of time we waste on things that are quite unnecessary. If one could observe oneself even for a little while, how much more time and strength could one save, instead of allowing it all to be dissipated on one unnecessary thing after the other. There were books lying on the table which he had received only that morning. Leslie knew from experience that after dinner he would want to go to sleep, but now he wanted to read, to think. He rang the bell. "I'm not having dinner," he said to the boy, who appeared noiselessly. "Bring me a small whiskey and a large soda, 2 lemons, and some more ice." Then, feeling immense relief, Leslie washed and put on his pajamas. The boy brought a bottle of soda water, ice in a glass, 2 tiny green Ceylon lemons the size of walnuts, and a little whiskey at the bottom of a tall glass. He set it all out on the table and silently put a square of paper and a pencil in front of Leslie. This was the usual ritual. Leslie had to write a chit for the buffet. Leslie squeezed the 2 lemons into the glass, added ice and a dash of whiskey, poured some water, took a sip, lit his short blackened pipe, and sat down at the table in a comfortable wicker armchair, armed with one of his new books and a paper knife. He cut the book, but in his mind, as far as I could see, the talk with the Indian still continued. Suddenly I noticed the little devil again. He had a very embarrassed and puzzled expression. He walked around the room, waddling ridiculously on his short, spindly legs, licking his narrow, protruding lips, obviously looking for Leslie. It was the most weird spectacle. The little devil had lost Leslie and could not find him. Again and again he came up to the table where Leslie sat. He was like someone hypnotized who had been told he would not be able to see his close friend. So there he was, fumbling about, even touching Leslie's knee, but bewildered, walking on. He clearly sensed that all was not well with him, but I could not understand what was wrong. Yes, indeed, what I saw was certainly a very curious phenomenon. This, more than anything else, revealed to me the rare relation of devil to man, a devil's true nature, and his fear of losing a man. Evidently, though my devil did not tell me this, it happened much more often than they wished. At first I thought the disappearance of Leslie depended upon the book he was reading, and I looked over his shoulder. I knew this book, even knew the author, whose views I had always found rather too narrow. However, when I took a look at Leslie, I understood the clue lay not in the book, but in the way he was reading it. His whole being was immersed in the world of ideas. Material reality did not exist for him. So that is the secret, I thought. To get away from reality means to get away from the devil, to become invisible to him. This is excellent, for it signifies conversely that people of dull reality, practical workaday people in general, all ordinary sober people, belong absolutely and completely to the devil. To be frank, I was delighted by this discovery. The poor little devil, apparently despairing of finding Leslie, went and sat in the corner by the door, tucking his legs under him. Watching him intently, I saw that he was crying, wiping the tears away with his small fist, and altogether looking very miserable. Studying him, I realized that he was really suffering. I mean, his suffering was not purely egoistic. He was actually afraid for Leslie, who had suddenly disappeared to some place he could not imagine. It was as if some silly woman had fallen for Leslie and was incapable of understanding his thoughts and interests. She She would suffer like this, and there would be times when she too would be unable to find him, and she'd sit in a corner and whimper. For some unknown reason, a very vivid picture of such a relationship came into my mind. The Leslie I knew was young, full of hope and prospects, and the woman was plain, unintelligent, and dull. Both socially and intellectually, she was infinitely superior to Leslie. Leslie can never allow himself to be seen with her, nor introduce her to anybody, nor even tell anybody about her. Probably she is Eurasian, and she undoubtedly has some dubious past. It is possible that she belongs, in the words of Kipling, to the oldest profession. Where Leslie found her, how he got mixed up with her, and why he cannot leave her, is his secret. There is certainly something very unpleasant about it. He must hide her. It will be the end of his career and prospects if her existence becomes known. He will not be received anywhere. He will have to leave the service and go away. At one stroke, he will be a ruined man. The woman knows this, and yet with all her strength, she tries to keep her hold on him. And she succeeds, except for those moments when Leslie slips away from her. Why? What does Leslie keep her for? What is her hold on him? Why doesn't a man as strong and clever as Leslie cast his trash out of his life? It is quite incomprehensible. Probably there is something in her that he needs. Probably she appeals to some dark force in him. Such women can only keep their hold on men by appealing to their baser instincts. My own thoughts astonished me. How had I guessed that this little devil was a woman? Looking around, I realized that somehow I was in two places at once. Leslie's room and in the temple of Calais. Is it possible there is a grain of truth in what I've just been thinking? I asked the devil. Much more than you think, the devil replied. It is not simply a metaphor that the devil loves him like a woman. You may have guessed what may possibly be the most important aspect of our relationship with you. I've already mentioned that it is very difficult for me to explain in full the essence and characteristics of the relationships of devils with people. There are things with which you have to work out for yourself. Basically, we have no sex, but as we represent the reverse aspect of you, your sex is always reflected in us, but becomes the opposite. Do you understand? This little devil is not a woman, but in relation to Leslie, womanly traits appear in him because Leslie is a man. Had Leslie been a woman, masculine traits would have appeared in the little devil. Does this mean that each one of us has such a she, I ask, and every woman has such a he? Not necessarily, but it is quite possible, replied the devil. Now, do you understand the story of Adam? Why the story of Adam and Eve and their love disturbed us so much? The devil sneered with contempt. We were jealous of them. Some of us were jealous of Adam because of Eve, others of Eve because of Adam, and some, like myself, who feel equally male and female, were jealous in both directions at once. You can understand it now, but had I told you everything at once, you would not understood a thing. In our relations with people, sex plays a large part. Moreover, most people are much more easily influenced when it is employed. Somehow I completely failed to understand you, I said. Earlier you said that you cannot see people experiencing emotions of love, and now you say that the easiest way for you to influence people is from that direction. Which is the truth? Both, said the devil, not the least put out. The emotions of sex disgust and alienate us when they give rise to so-called romantic moods in people. Herein lies the main evil. We spare no strength to fight it, but we can do nothing. These romantic moods surround a person like a wall, and we lose them completely until the romance is over. Worse still, of course, is the connection of sex with the mystical, that much talked about sense of the miraculous and feelings of immortality. These sensations take people completely away from us and make them inaccessible to our influence. On the other hand, the same emotion of sex can be beneficent from our point of view, when it is connected with even the slightest feeling of aversion, with a sense of guilt and shame, with furtiveness and a sense of wrongdoing. That is just what we need. You see, the same emotion in one man can manifest itself differently in others. It can be for us or against us. It is only those who have the capacity for romance or romantic moods, or who experience wonder in a sensation of sex. The devil pronounced these words with scarcely disguised irritation, who are completely inaccessible to us. But fortunately, this happens rarely. The majority of people, men and women, regard such things very realistically without romantic ideas. And it is very easy for us to deal with such people. This Leslie White was one of the difficult ones, however. He is an Englishman, and there is therefore so much prejudice and hypocrisy surrounding his attitude to sex that it is surely possible to find some line of attack. There is much that he fears in himself, much he does not believe. He feels guilty at the same time, and to justify himself in his own eyes, tries to reduce all this to the lowest material level. It is there that we take him. And besides all this, you remember what I told you about play? So long as people believe that in the experience of sex, the realm of fact is not real, that the real is something else, they are inaccessible to us. But as soon as they begin to take it all seriously, and as a result of this become afraid and jealous, begin to hate and suffer, they are ours. You see, there are emotions of a material order through which people become accessible to us. These emotions are affected most easily through sex. I turned my eyes again to Leslie's room. The boy had brought some more whiskey and soda, and Leslie was already cutting and turning the pages of a third book. The little devil apparently had despaired of finding him, and sat in the corner totally dejected and obviously desperately anxious to think of a solution. Then he lay down on the floor, spread himself like a frog till he became flat as a sheet of paper, and working his way along with his hands and feet, crawled under the door. I became interested in where he would go now. Getting up from the floor, the little devil shook himself, swelled up like a balloon, and ran down the stairs. I began to watch him, leaving Leslie for the time being. The little devil came out to a locked door at the seashore, and wailing from side to side, he started walking along the sand. A dark wave was running up, leaving behind a line of white foam. The night was warm and dark, almost velvety. The stars were shining, and between two palm trees, like shooting stars, the fireflies were flitting. But the little devil did not pay attention to any of this. For at that moment he suddenly had the look of a rag and bone man, some petty hawker considering a cheap deal on the seashore under the palms. What business had he with these palm trees? They could not be cut and sold, whereas the fireflies, they had no market value. If you told a schemer like this that the night was enchanting and beautiful, it would seem nonsense to him. More probably he would start thinking of how he could knock a rupee or two out of this fool by selling him an artificial pearl or something like that. The little devil seemed exactly such a cheapjack. He represented the impossibility of becoming aware of anything with holes, enchantment, or beauty. At this moment I understood that our gravest mistake in ascribing to the devil positive evil forces, such as demonic traits. There is nothing positive in the devil, nor can there be. This I saw quite clearly. The devil is the absence of all that is highest and most refined in human beings. Absence of religious feeling, absence of vision, absence of the feeling for beauty, absence of awareness of the miraculous. Swaying from side to side, the little devil walked fairly quickly over the sand beneath the palm trees, staring the whole time into the darkness as if he were looking for something. Finally he turned aside, and I noticed that on the sand another devil sat by the thick trunk of a palm. By the look of him he was fairly important. He had a fat belly, a grey goatee beard, and a skull cap. The little devil sat down on the sand opposite him and began apparently to tell him all about his failure with Leslie, pointing from time to time in the direction of the hotel. I could not make out what he was saying. I was struck, however, by how much he actually resembled a woman, as if he had combined in himself every objectionable and unpleasing feature found in a common and vulgar female. The old devil listened intently. Then he began to speak in obviously didactic tones. And the little devil sat in front of him, his head bent to one side, his chin on his palm, listening intently, as if afraid to miss a word. I returned to Leslie. He continued to read for a long time, writing down any thoughts which occurred to him. Later he went to bed. The night flashed quickly past me, and the short tropical dawn came. In India, Ceylon gets up early. The servants were sweeping the corridors and carrying tea and coffee to the rooms. A Sinhalese boy in a narrow white sarong and jacket, barefoot and wearing a tortoiseshell comb in his head, silently entered Leslie's room with a big tray in his hand. Leslie was still asleep under the mosquito net. Treading lightly, the boy stopped and placed the tray on a low table by the bed. I glanced at the tray and to my amazement saw that everything on the tray was the devil. That same little devil I had left under the palm. Now the little devil assumed a diversity of forms, and one must give him his due. He looked very attractive and appetizing. First it was tea, 2 medium-sized dark teapots, one containing hot water, the other strong and fragrant Ceylon tea, amber-colored Australian butter with a piece of ice on a small plate, thick marmalade, a hot, soft-boiled egg in a china egg cup, 2 pieces of cheese, a small heap of hot toast, 4 dark yellow curved bananas, 2 black violet mangosteens, a fruit so tender that it cannot be brought to Europe. And all of this was the little devil. Leslie opened one eye and looked at the tray. Then he stretched and yawned, opened the other eye, and sat up in bed. I saw at once yesterday's thoughts come flooding back to him, and how cheerful he felt. How pleasant it was for him to remember it all. The talk with the Indian, his intention to study yoga, and all the thoughts which had occurred to him in the evening. The whole point is in training. The old man is right, said Leslie to himself. Above all, one must always observe oneself, not allow oneself to do anything without asking, is this necessary for my aim? And observe one's thoughts and words and actions so that everything is conscious. I saw that Leslie found it enjoyable talking to himself like this, and gratifying to think that he knew all about such things. Soon he lifted the mosquito net and scrambled out. He was about to get up, but the tray with the devil on it caught his attention, and he involuntarily looked at the bananas. I had guessed the trap set for him. For a split second it seemed as if he were hesitating. But then, in a business-like manner, he poured out a large cup of strong tea and spread a piece of toast thickly with marmalade. Leslie was feeling exceptionally well. Everything in him longed to make a start, to work, and his conscience told him he could not deny himself a bit of pleasure. Tea, toast, butter, marmalade, an egg, bananas, cheese, all disappeared very quickly. Making a slight cut with a knife, Leslie broke the thick black shell of the mangosteen and took out the tender white fruit. It looks like a mandarin. It's faintly acidic and aromatic and melts in the mouth. The second one followed the first, and that was the end of it. Glancing at the tray with some regret, Leslie began to get up. While he was washing and shaving, the little devil appeared again by him. He had a crumpled look, but beyond all doubt, he could see Leslie now. Leslie was thinking about everything as before, only his thoughts were, so to speak, slightly duller. I could not now detect that aura of creativeness apparent in his thoughts in the previous evening. The thoughts seemed to go around in the same circle. However, Leslie held them fast, and apparently they were welcome to him. Leslie finished dressing, came down, walked through the dining room, and went out on the veranda facing the sea. In front of the veranda there was a small lawn, and further beyond the palm trees was the sea, blue and glittering. On the right, the green shore ran towards Colombo, and one could see the tops of the sails on the fishermen's catamarans drying where they had been dragged out onto the sand. Leslie glanced involuntarily in that direction. True, he had come out here simply because the boy was tidying the room and he intended to work till lunchtime. But right now the sea was drawing him. There was so much sun, and the light breeze with the smell of the water caressed him. Leslie felt how good it would be to rock in the catamaran over the clear waves, and once again to think over yesterday's talk. No, it is better to work, he said to himself. One must not start right away by giving in. I will go only to see that everything in the catamaran is in order. Whistling, he ran down the stone steps built into the sea. And I saw that the little devil, just like a dog, dashed off ahead at full speed. A young Sinhalese fisherman who Leslie always took out to sea with him was standing by the boats. He was listening very attentively to an old fisherman, trying not to miss a single word. The old man, whose grey hair was plaited at the back of his head, was telling him about his court case against a rich man called Silva, whose car had killed a calf. There is nothing in the world more interesting to the Sinhalese and the Tamils in Ceylon, indeed in the whole of India up to the Himalayas, than a court case. Law courts are the most popular form of entertainment of the Indians, and their favorite theme of conversations. In the time of the Rajas, there was no such justice because right belonged to the one who paid the most. This did not afford to any kind of interest because it was known in advance who could pay more and thus who would be in the right. But the English introduced real courts of law in which it was never known in advance who would win. Such trials added an element of chance and became a popular pastime. The people of India took enthusiastic advantage of this new entertainment. The court is theater, club, and circus. It is snake charming, a fistfight and a cockfight, all at the same time and place. Legal experts enjoy immense respect and authority, and everyone is always at law prosecuting somebody. Only the very poorest and most unfortunate person has no legal case. But then he himself is being sued for something or other. The young fisherman was completely immersed in the elaborate evidence put forward by the owner of the killed calf. However, at that moment, the little devil ran up to him, hit him on the shoulder with his fist, and pushed him in the direction of the hotel. Seeing Leslie coming down to the sea, the boy assumed he was going out in his catamaran, and tearing himself away from the fascinating story with some regret, he rushed at once to meet Leslie with a radiant face. "Master wants to go to sea? Wonderful weather, Master. There is not so much wind, but we will put the sails up at once. Everything will be ready now, Master." Without waiting for an answer, the boy, his head lowered and naked heels flashing, raced off to Leslie's catamaran, which was beached some distance from the others. Without intending to, Leslie caught his enthusiasm and, smiling, followed him. As things turned out, he decided it would do no harm to spend half an hour on the sea. Out at sea, the wind was stronger than it had seemed ashore. The catamaran rose and fell, gliding over the waves like an ice boat on ice, responding to every movement of the rudder. Leslie did not have the heart to turn back for a long time. However, on the return trip, they had to beat against the oncoming fresh wind, and as a result, Leslie did not get back to the hotel till 9:30. Breakfast was nearly over when he walked through the dining room. Although he felt pretty hungry after 2 hours on the water, he wanted to go straight to his room so as not to lose any more time. But the head boy, barefoot in a narrow white sarong and white dinner jacket with a tortoiseshell comb on his head, bowed to him with such deep respect that only Indian servants know how, that Leslie, without thinking, went up to his own table and sat down. Overtaking him, the little devil had already jumped on the table and turned into the menu, coquettishly leaning against a vase of flowers. The young boy brought tea and marmalade, as is customary for the first breakfast, and stood waiting for further orders. Leslie poured himself a large cup of strong tea, and on taking a sip, glanced at the menu and ordered the traditional English grilled smoked herring. After the herring, he asked for another national dish, fried eggs and bacon. Then a medium-sized steak with fried onions. Then an Indian dish, curry, which is served nowhere else as it is in Ceylon. Serving curry is a ritual in itself. First of all, the head boy brought a large tureen of hot, fluffy, fragrant rice. Leslie put a large portion on his plate. Afterwards, another boy brought 2 dishes with canisters full of different sauces. Sauces made of crayfish necks, fish, eggs, and tomato with chunks of meat, a repulsive yellow sauce of curry roots, and a sauce of some kind of lentil. Leslie helped himself from 3 serving dishes. Then a third boy brought a large dish divided into about 12 sections. This held grated coconut, a small dried stinking fish, pepper and all sorts of guises, chopped onions, some very hot yellow paste, and various other strange condiments. And finally the head boy put before Leslie a bowl of hot mango chutney. While Leslie was helping himself to the different ingredients of curry and mixing them on his plate, as is the custom, I saw with horror that all this was the little devil. His feet stuck out of one tureen, his head bobbed about in another. Following the curry, which made his mouth burn terribly, Leslie drank 2 more cups of tea and ate several pieces of toast and marmalade. Then he had some cheese and, refusing sweets, began to eat fruit, an orange, several bananas, and then a mango. Mango is a fairly big, dark green, heavy and cold fruit. Holding it on a plate with the left hand, one cuts off large pieces around the kernel with a knife, and then eats the cold, aromatic, succulent pulp with a spoon. It tastes like a mixture of pineapple and peach ice cream, sometimes with a hint of strawberries. 2 mangoes, a bottle of ginger, and a cigarette finished off Leslie White's breakfast. Smoking a cigarette, Leslie remembered he had to go to town. This was annoying because, it meant putting off his work. The train ran beneath the palms along the seashore. A green ray wave rose, lifted like a glass rampart, and fell, scattering white foam on the sand and rolling right up to the train. The sea was so brilliant and glittering that one's eyes hurt to look at it. But Leslie did not particularly want to look at any of this. Just at present he felt that he saw it all every day, and it seemed to him that the train was going exceedingly slowly. He had to call in at work and at the tailor's, and then return for lunch. He had no desire to think, but it was pleasant to remember that he had something very good in store, to which he would return when the time came. The little devil was here too, though he looked rather tired. I realized that he did not achieve the 2 breakfasts for Leslie White without a price. At the same time, he was apparently very pleased with himself. He climbed onto the seat opposite Leslie and sat, now and again, looking out of the window. Leslie returned to his hotel at 1:20. It was hot, with the usual salon hothouse heat. Leslie went to his room to wash and change, and in a fresh white suit and an immaculate soft collar, he came down to the dining room. Lunch was in progress. At a small table next to Leslie sat his regular neighbor, a retired Indian colonel. Before the meal he had finished a bottle of stout with ice, which he drank for health reasons, and now regarded the world with a good-humored and benign gaze. Cheerfully Leslie greeted the colonel and then rolled his table napkin. The boy put a plate of tomato soup in front of him. However, I saw it was really that same little devil. After the soup, the little devil became a soft-boiled fish, then fried chicken with ham and green salad, then cold mutton with jam and jelly, then a wildfowl pâté, and then again curry, which was served with the same pomp on 25 small plates. All this Leslie conscientiously put away. After curry, the little devil turned into ice cream and then fruit, oranges, mango, and pineapple. Having finished the lunch, Leslie got up feeling somewhat heavy. Well, now I will read at leisure, he told himself. Then I must get to Lady Gerald's for tea. Leslie went to his room, ordered soda water and lemon, took off nearly everything he could, and sat down by the table with a book and pipe. He read one page very attentively, but in the middle of the second page, he suddenly caught himself repeating a sentence without being able to understand what it meant. At the same time, he felt a strange heaviness in the temples. And when he looked around towards the bed, he noticed, as if for the first time, that it looked particularly attractive. Mechanically, he put the book down, went over to the bed, and yawned. The little devil was already fidgeting about, smoothing the pillowcase. Leslie glanced at his watch and lay down on the bed. He fell almost at once into a deep and healthy sleep. Meanwhile, the little devil climbed into the armchair by the table, took Leslie's unfinished pipe and the book he had been reading, and looking very self-important, began puffing clouds of smoke and turning the pages of the book, which he purposely held upside down. Leslie slept for 2 hours so soundly that when he woke up, he did not know at first whether it was morning or evening. Finally, he looked at his watch, and seeing it was already 4:30, he jumped out of bed and began to wash and dress. The boy again brought him soda water and lemon, and within 15 minutes, looking fresh and neat, Leslie was running to the station next to the hotel. In front of him ran the little devil. The 5 o'clock tea given by Lady Gerald was served in the garden. I was astonished when I saw Leslie White at one table with two ladies. One tall, slender blonde was Margaret Ingleby. Now I understood why Leslie was in such a hurry. I had met Margaret some 2 years before this in Venice, and I did not know that she had arrived in Ceylon. She was here with her aunt, a rather talkative, gray-haired lady, and as I understood from the conversation, Leslie was meeting her for the second time only. Now he was enthusiastically telling Margaret about Ceylon, and their conversation was not at all like the small talk going on at the other tables. Lady Gerald took the aunt away to show her some Indian rarities, and Margaret remained alone with Leslie. I could not help seeing that they were very taken with each other, and that Margaret was the first to admit it. I had always liked her very much. I had always liked her. She had the interesting style of a woman from an 18th century painting or engraving. A woman to her fingertips, one French artist said about her. Not a trace of hardness or abruptness of movement, usually with the English women who play golf. She had a wonderfully chiseled neck, a small mouth, also a great rarity in an English woman. A particularly individual shape to her lips, enormous gray eyes, a musical voice, and a slow and slightly lazy manner of speaking. She saw that she made an impression on Leslie, and this pleased her, quite apart from any other considerations. She knew that Leslie was entirely out of the question for her. The aunt, with her usually garrulousness, had already spoken about him to Lady Gerald, and Margaret had heard that Leslie had no money, lived on a salary, was 28 years old, and that even under the most favorable circumstances would not be able to marry for 10 years. Margaret was already 29 herself, and she decided that she would be married within a year at the very latest. In the last resort, she would take one of her ever-faithful admirers, of whom there were 3. This did not diminish her interest, however, and she felt attracted to Leslie. He was not like the others. He spoke fascinatingly of things which interested her and which nobody else knew about. It pleased her to sit there in the wicker chair listening to Leslie and watching how his eyes from time to time involuntarily glanced over her legs, and how suddenly, by an effort of will, he raised them again. Observing them, I suddenly noticed something familiar, and looking more closely, I saw that Leslie and Margaret were Adam and Eve. But oh Lord, how many obstacles had now been piled up between them. I understood what was meant by the angel with the fiery sword. They could not even look at each other without uneasiness. At the same time, they both felt that they knew each other well, and had known each other for a long time. And if they had allowed themselves the liberty, they could have entered at once into a much closer intimacy. But they knew very well that they would not permit themselves the liberty, even though it was strange and almost ridiculous how close they were to each other. They were finishing tea, and Leslie, before whom the little devil had pushed a plate of sandwiches from behind his left elbow, mechanically demolished a fair-sized heap. "Let us go and look at your sea," Margaret said in her slow and melodious voice. Leslie got up, feeling slightly alarmed lest someone should approach them. Luckily, nobody joined them. Many were leaving. In the corner of the garden was a stone summer house with branches and steps to the beach. Here they sat down, and Leslie placed himself so as to see in front of him Margaret's silhouette against the background of sea and sky. To the right of them, the large red sphere of the sun was descending low over the dark blue horizon of the sea. The waves were lapping gently, and there was a breath of wind as the pre-dusk silence settled over the whole of nature. Leslie was speaking about yesterday's discussion with the Indian. "What surprised me most were my own feelings," Leslie was saying. "I am not in the least sentimental, and yet at this time of the conversation, I felt a positively tender feeling towards this old man, as if he were my father, whom I had not seen for years, and whom I had lost and suddenly found. It was something like that, you understand? Actually, I did not agree with much of what he was saying. This feeling went somehow counter to my consciousness. So, it means that India really exists," Margaret was saying. "No, you simply must get to know everything completely. Just think how fascinating it all is. Suddenly you will find a real miracle. I have read everything that has been written about it, but the most important things are usually left out. And you feel that the people who write the books know nothing themselves and take anybody's word for it." Leslie listened to Margaret with admiration. She literally spoke his thoughts and in his own words. "No, this old man made quite a different impression," he said. "I felt without doubt that he knew, and that through him it was possible to find people who know still more." Suddenly, Leslie felt that everything he was saying about the Indian acquired some special new meaning because he was saying it to Margaret. Leslie suddenly understood that if he could take the 2 steps which separated him from Margaret, and then take her by the waist and lead her right down to the sea, walk with her along the water's edge, feel it roll under their feet, further and further on, until the stars began to shine. Somewhere there were no people, but only the 2 of them. Then, straight away, everything which the old Indian had spoken about would become a complete reality. And he would not need any kind of yoga, nor any kind of study. He would only need to go with Margaret along the seashore to look at the stars, to wait for the sun to rise, to rest in a forest thicket during the midday heat, and in the evening go out again to the sea, and to walk, and walk always farther and farther on. At the same moment, Leslie felt suddenly how well and how intimately he knew Margaret. He knew the touch of her hands and of her entire body, the smell of her hair, the look of her eyes quite close to his own, the light movement of her lashes, the touch of her cheek, her lips, the feeling of her moving body. And all this passed suddenly like a dream. For a brief split second he remembered Margaret, and remembered an evening exactly like this, on exactly the same seashore. In the same way the red sphere of the sun had sunk into the darkening sea. In the same way the surf could be heard running up. In the same way had the palm trees rustled. The experience was so strong that it took his breath away, and he suddenly fell silent. Margaret listened to him, leaning slightly toward him. Everything he said was new and interesting, but it amused her, for what she wanted was something quite different. She laughed inwardly at the thought of how astonished Leslie White would be if she had done what she was thinking of. She would have liked to take Leslie by the shoulders, just like a young girl, and shake him. Instinctively she felt how strong and heavy he was, and could feel his firm, but at the same time supple and flexible body. She felt that if she did take Leslie by the shoulders, she would not be able to move him. Her awareness of this strength and his living weight was somehow particularly pleasant. It blended with her awareness of his gaze, which she could feel returning again and again to her ankles, her hands, and her lips every time he had made an effort to look away. "You silly," she was saying to herself. "If you could only know what I am thinking." Her eyes began to sparkle with fire. "Where is the little devil?" I thought. "It would be interesting to know what he is doing now. Is it possible that Leslie has eaten him up completely?" But at that moment I saw the head of the little devil projecting out from under the bench on which Leslie sat, with his eyes gazed fixedly on Margaret. Even I was startled. Here was the very green-eyed monster itself. It was here that the satanic nature of the devil revealed itself in its entirety. There was infinite hatred and malice in his look, and a kind of coarse, repulsive cynicism and madness. Apparently what was tearing at the devil's very vitals was fear. "What is he afraid of?" I asked the devil. "Can you really not understand?" he replied. "Leslie might disappear from him at any moment. But think what he must feel, to have this happen after all his self-sacrifice. You saw how he loves Leslie, and now because of this wretched girl, all his labors may be in vain. You can see that Leslie is again absorbed in these fantasies, and now they are particularly dangerous. You have noticed that he already remembers, of course. He cannot understand these memories, but at the same time he was very near to dangerous discoveries. You say that he can disappear. How?" I asked. "If he takes the one step," said the devil. "What step?" "The one step which is separating them, only he will not do it." "Just think, in Lady Gerald's garden?" "Of course not." "What can he do?" "As it is, they've been sitting too long by themselves. This can only be excused by Margaret's recent arrival."